in Romans chapter 7. He talked about a drive that was really all about his appetites. Things that deep within him he craved. And those drives just wouldn't go away. Simply because he'd come to Christ. Those drives, those appetites were still there. But he also had what many of you have. He had the Spirit of Christ in him. And the Spirit of Christ in him desired something totally different. Because the Spirit of Christ is not afraid that we're going to run out. The Spirit of Christ does not have a scarcity mentality. The Spirit of Christ is about trusting God with an unknown future. Trusting God that just as he's provided in time past, he's going to continue to provide in the future. But I'm describing two very different powers at work within us. And they naturally clash. Now, read with me. I'm going to start with Romans chapter 7, verse 15, and then I'm going to skip to verse 21. So I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Does that ring a bell with anybody? I want to do what's right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. Verse 21, I've discovered this principle of life that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart, but there's another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still in me. After years as a Christian, a powerful, influential Christian, a Christian more devoted to Christ than most of us can even imagine, it's still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? And he goes on to say, the only way to be free is through Christ. Now we know, if we've been in church for long, that the answer to any question in Sunday school is what? Jesus. And so if I ask you, what is the answer to handling our appetites, our natural appetites that get out of control, the answer is Jesus. And that's true, totally true. But what does that mean? What do we mean when we say Jesus is the answer? Part of what we mean is that all these appetites and temptations, drives that defeat us and control us did not defeat or control Christ. He was stronger than they were. And therefore, he was victorious in his personal life. There was no appetite that was going to master him except for his appetite for God. And the reason the answer to this is Jesus is very simple, though you may never have considered it. The way we are going to learn to manage, to handle, to direct our out-of-control appetites is to become more Christ-like. That means the more Christ-like you grow, the bigger and the stronger you become spiritually, the more Holy Spirit power there is in you to do the right thing even when the wrong thing is screaming for your attention and begging you to do it. So Jesus is the answer. Why is it, though, that so many of us, why is it that most of the world seemingly can't control their passions. Why is it that we lose control? Well, years ago, there was an old preacher who said, our natural appetites and drives are like wild horses. Your appetites, your desires are like wild horses. Now, I want to ask you, is there anything wrong with a wild horse who's running free out on the Montana plains? Is that wrong? God made that horse wild. It's not that he's wrong. The fact that we have these appetites and drives is not right or wrong. God gave them to us. The problem is that we don't know how to handle those wild horses. We don't know how to break them. We don't know how to train them. We don't know how to guide them. I once broke a wild horse. I mean, literally, he was a Mustang captured by the Bureau of Land Management up in the Red Desert of Wyoming. The wildest creature I've ever worked with, I'll say this. We caught a raccoon in a live chat yesterday morning. And you know how that works, most of you. You even get near them, and they just freak out and try to bite you through the iron bars. That wild. This horse was that wild. Problem was, he was now in man's world. And because he was in man's world, he could not operate that way and expect to stay alive. He had to surrender to a master who would firmly but fairly train him. Teach him to take all those wild instincts of his, the instinct to just tear, to just paw the life out of me, his master, the instinct to kick my ribs in. After months and months of working with him, he became so gentle that I could set my little infant son, Jake, on the back of that horse. Now, did I take away any of that horse's strength? No, I didn't want to take away the strength. That was one reason I wanted him. The strength was good. Did I take away any of his speed? No. The speed is a good thing on a horse. But what I was out to do was to take those wild parts and teach him how to control them so that they would not master him. See, either I was going to be his master or his appetites and drives would be his master. And the same is true of me and everybody in this place. Either God will be your master or your appetites will be your master. Somebody's going to be your master. We're not really free when it comes to this area of our lives. So if I refuse to surrender completely to God and allow him to work in my life and make him the master of my appetites, then my natural appetites will run wild and they will master me, and I'll hurt a lot of people plus myself. Now, this we're talking about is not new stuff, boy. This goes back to the earliest times in the Old Testament. Do you remember how the children of Israel were constantly being tempted to worship idols? And these idols were generally formed to look like some animal. And this animal represented some natural appetite within the person. the worshiper. They didn't understand it. They couldn't control it. All they knew to do was try to worship it in hopes that they could somehow make a deal with these appetites out of their control. So they personalized these appetites. They took these appetites and molded them into wood and stone. And let me mention a couple of those appetites, those gods. One of those old gods was named Bacchus. He was very simply the god of appetite. Bacchus. You went to his temple and you let your appetites go wild. Now, I don't think we've got a temple to Bacchus here in Mena, Arkansas, but we do have a Simple Simon's all-you-can-eat pizza. And we've got a lime tree buffet and a China buffet, and those are the places we can go and really surrender to our appetites. You see, the old heathen gods haven't really gone away. They've just sort of grown underground. Another one I bet some of you have heard of, Aphrodite. Aphrodite was the ancient god of sex. And here again, I don't know of a temple in Polk County that is officially and openly devoted to Aphrodite, but I sure know there are hundreds, maybe thousands of homes in Polk County which have been destroyed, broken beyond repair, because somebody in that family was worshiping Aphrodite. They were allowing it. They were letting Aphrodite be their master instead of making God their master. You can't get away from this. Mars and Jupiter, they were the gods of war. Do you know that when somebody makes you mad and you want to rear up and paw them, you want to kick their teeth out, it's the same thing that human beings have always felt the desire to do. And Christ came to, number one, forgive us for all those times we chose to worship Aphrodite or Jupiter or Bacchus. He forgives us for the times we served those other appetites, surrendered to them, and then He works with us to clean up the mess we made and to strengthen us so that we can become victorious. Now, I gotta clarify something. Because now, as always, there are two basic ways that people deal with their appetites. Always have been two. Very simple. The first way is to do what they did at the temples of Aphrodite and Jupiter. You just turn the wild thing loose. You say, God made it. He made it wild. He made me with this desire. I'm going to turn it loose and celebrate. That's what they did in pagan temples. That's what they do in our houses today. That's one way. And that's the way that, honestly, that's the way our civilization has moved in the last 40 years, more and more toward just let it wild, let it run. Let the wild horse run. And we got a lot of hurt people because of that. But why did they go to the extreme? Those hippies back then. Why do people go to the extreme of letting the wild horses run and just throw off the rider? Just be wild. Why? Because many of them were reacting to an opposite extreme that we put in place. Christians. Because unfortunately, a lot of Christianity, for a lot of years, took the second approach I was talking about. Remember, the first is you let the horses run wild. The second approach that Christianity has taken too many times is you basically kill the horse. These desires, you stomp them and you stuff them down. You ignore them. In my home, we couldn't even say the word sex. It was considered so awful that it wasn't going to be breathed. That word wasn't going to be breathed at our dinner table. Push it down so hard. Ignore it, and it'll go away. Come on now. If you ignore it, does it go away, men? That doesn't work. Now, I am not bashing Catholic priest in what I'm going to say. It is simply a fact that I want to point out. When you tell a large mixed group of men that they can never marry, and therefore there'll never be any expression whatsoever for their natural sexual desires, you're asking for perversions to come up. It's almost like inviting things like molestation. Because, yes, there are some people, Paul said, who are like he was. He apparently was made in such a way, God had put him together in such a way that sex was just not a temptation for him. That was not one of his problems. He had other things that were. He just didn't have a problem there. And so he could not get married and be single, and he was fine. But he said, not everybody's like me. But when you take everybody who's going to be a priest and you try to make them live that way, when large percentage of them, probably the majority, were not wired that way, there's going to be problems. I'm saying either extreme, whether you try to kill the horse and choke out the appetite, or whether you say, let the horse run and take the rider off, the rider usually being Christian morality. Either one of those is going to cause problem. And did you know that Jesus Christ promoted neither one? Jesus Christ was balanced, wisely balanced in this area as in all other areas. He understood passions. He understood appetites. He understood men and women. He understood why we do the things we do and what it'll take to help us outgrow the temptations that used to just kick our tails. I want to give you an example. He chose the Apostle Paul. He chose the Apostle Paul to be his number one representative to the Gentiles. Was Paul a man who had all his appetites under control? No, don't even go there. Paul was a worshiper. He saw himself as a worshiper of the one true God. He was really a worshiper of Jupiter. Though he'd have never admitted it, he was a worshiper of power, force, war. And so the book of Acts said he seethed out hatred for the Christians, and he killed all he could. Here's a man in whom there's an out of control desire to control other people and to destroy anybody who doesn't believe exactly what he believes. Remember what I just said a minute ago? He didn't seem to have a problem with sex. Does that mean he didn't have a problem? No. He had a terrible problem with power, the desire to dominate other people. So did Jesus say, not going to use him? He's flawed because he's got this desire to control. No, Jesus said, I will take that desire and I will tame it. And this Paul, who under the force of his natural appetite was out to destroy and stomp out the church, this Paul I will retrain. I will redeem him. I'll save him. I'll transform him. I'll make him into a man who is now just as dedicated to spreading the gospel and growing the church as he ever was to stomping out the gospel. Jesus wasn't about getting rid of appetites. Jesus was about learning to use God-given appetites in the right way. Think of some other disciples. There was Simon the Zealot. There was Peter, who was a fiery hothead. Always wanted to fight. He's the one that chopped off the servant's ear when they came to arrest Jesus. And Jesus harnessed that raging drive to fight and not give up. And he used that Peter as a powerful tool for changing the world around him. And he wouldn't quit, and he would not give up, not even when they turned him upside down and nailed him to a cross. God knows what your out of control appetites are. And you may think that means he can't use you. No. He's just going to show you how to use those appetites in a way you never dreamed was possible. Because God doesn't make mistakes with the appetites he gives us. He knows what he's doing. And so what happens is that when we come to Christ, we come to Christ like a wild horse, never surrendered to anybody. I go where I want, I say what I want, I think what I want. Whatever my instinct tells me to do, that's what I go after. Nobody has any hold on me. I will not answer to anyone. To a point, that's basically what an unsaved and unsurrendered person is. They may do it in a nicer way. Maybe they wouldn't come out and put it that way. But the bottom line of salvation, is surrender. It's saying, God, my appetites have been in control, and I've refused to do anything about it. But I want to surrender to you. I surrender all that I have. The parts of me I like and the parts of me I don't like. I surrender it all. And God, I'm tired of letting my appetites, my desires for money, my desires for power, my desire to be liked and thought well of and to have a high reputation in town and everybody think I'm beautiful. I'm tired of letting those drive me. I surrender. And I ask you to be my Lord that means you become the rider of this horse. And I ask you to be my Savior, which means Jesus saves me from my sin, which is one way of saying he saves me from myself, the destruction I'm going to bring to myself and others until I surrender and let him save me from that. Have you done that? Have you come to Christ? Humble as an old dog. He said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I thought I was strong because I was following my raging desires, and I've only proved how weak I am. Forgive me. Clean up my life. And most of all, sit in the saddle of my heart and take me where you want me to go. Make me into what you want me to be. That, when that happens, you've been converted. Have you been converted?